go ahead and get right to main experience that basically changed your life, had a major impact on your life in 1994. So let's talk about that day preceding the experience, and then we'll get right into the experience.
Okay.
So tell me about that day. When did this experience that you have been calling Knowles? When did that experience happen?
So that was October 13th, 1994, in the evening, somewhere after dinner, maybe about 9 o'clock or something.
And this was in Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and off of Las Olas Isles. The woman I was dating at the time had a place on the water, and there were sailboats. It was really nice. The sailboats docked in the back, so you could hear the clanging of the sailboats, which became a very pleasant
Anthony,
sound for me.
Anthony and I just recently actually drove right past there
Oh,
last night, and there were still tons of
right.
catamarans and double pontoon boats all parked in that canal waterway
Yes,
there.
yes.
So, is there anything to talk about the morning leading up into that
Well,
experience? Tell
so
me about that day.
okay, so my state of being at the time was my divorce was finalized in August of '94, and so this was October, so 2 months after my divorce was finalized, and I was beginning to feel really good, and so I had met a woman. Well, you remember Martha,
Yeah.
and my kids loved her. By the way, she was a great woman, and we were out for dinner. We went to a sushi bar, and we started talking about spiritual growth and everything. And I told her that since for a long time I've wanted to know how to reach inside somebody and flick the switch spiritually and turn on the light so that would kind of like activate them in some form, like this but kind of the same thing that happened to me. So my experiences activated me.
Sounds like um, when when a person has what my friend Ashley calls a mountaintop experience
Right.
with God, you want another person to also have that experience. So
Right.
you at that time you wanted to be able to reach inside someone and basically cause them to have an experience with their soul, the authentic self, which is the bridge to the divine.
Right.
It's not the human. The human mind and the human condition is not spiritual. The spirituality is in what we call the soul or the spirit, and then that is the bridge extension to the divine, to God, to source, however you want to call it, but that's basically how it's set up.
Okay.
So, go ahead and tell me about um, kind of specifically what you and Martha were talking about. What was the atmosphere like?
Um, it was very pleasant. Japanese restaurant, sushi. Uh, but when I started talking about wanting to flick the switch, turn on the spirit inside of somebody, I got emotional. I got teary-eyed um, in the restaurant. And so, anyways, that conversation. We left the restaurant. That conversation carried on into the car, and then we went over to her house and we sat on the couch and we started talking about it. And so,
Really deep things you guys were discussing at that time.
yeah, and we were, talking about all different aspects of it. And so the so then it began, and what it lasted a total of about 5 hours. But the very first wave that hit me was more like not a spiritual experience, but more like a spiritual revelation or epiphany that I don't have the power.
Okay, well you're getting ahead of yourself there. The details are important, and they're important for the audience. So talk about the step by step happenings of what this experience was. How did it begin?
Well, I personally think, and I don't know this 100% for sure, because here again, there's levels of knowledge and understanding. So I'm connecting the dots, thinking that already having had a number of different experiences, spiritual experiences, that my desire for it is what kept these things
Yeah.
coming. So this was just, so what I learned is, so the white light was one experience when I was 11. Then another experience that when was it? 1981 probably. Every new experience was greater in breadth and depth and detail. And so this one was the first utmost elaborate and detailed experience than all of them. I mean, it's one thing to see a white light, but this Knowles experience was incredibly detailed. And
okay. Talk about the beginnings of it. You guys went back to the apartment. What happened?
so we were just sitting on the couch talking about my desire or the idea of trying to help somebody have a spiritual awakening and how that would happen, and everything. So
You're sitting on the couch.
so I just said it. We're sitting on the couch talking about it. Okay, there's nothing, I don't know what else to say about that. We'll edit this part out, but
I'm trying to get you to say the tunnel started opening.
that I'm going there, but that didn't happen yet.
Okay.
So the first thing that happened was I had like a spiritual revelation that I didn't have the power to reach inside somebody else or reach inside myself and spiritualize myself or awaken myself or
That you don't even have the power to do it to yourself?
as a human being, that power, it only comes from spirit, which should make total sense. We're talking about having a spiritual awakening, right?
Yeah.
Not from a material mind. That power only exists, that ability only exists in the soul, in the spiritual realm, that has the ability to lift the veil or spiritualize the mind. The human mind. Right. The human mind cannot spiritualize itself. It is a biological entity. So the gray areas are human consciousness, but there's a limit to that. And I know that man is really evolving and growing in his human consciousness toward the spiritual, but without really understanding. I mean, eventually it'll happen. I think this is just what I'm about to say tonight is the eventual evolution of mankind spiritually.
And we certainly hope so, right?
Yeah. So anyway, so that revelation that only spirit, only God, only spirit, only soul, whatever words you want to use, only spirit can reveal itself to the materialistic mind of man. Man doesn't become anything. The spirit reveals itself. And that is, if you look at through thousands of years of holding or tracking different spiritual experiences, you see it's the same thing. Man doesn't become something. Something is revealed to him, then he responds to that. Maybe he's a different person after that. He thinks differently, certainly like I did, but it's not like he became that in and of himself.
Right.
So the mind has to be opened by spirit, and this is what was conveyed to me as a first wave. So that gave me the ability to sit back and relax and say, oh my God, so it's not my responsibility to do that to myself or anybody else, because I can't. It's like a fruitless effort. So I felt relieved at that moment from having to do that. So that led into more conversation, and then all of a sudden, I'm looking down, there was a moment of silence, and I'm looking down at the coffee table, and I noticed that there's like this undulating tunnel forming in front of me, so I'd see reality, and like this little portal would open, and behind it was just purple. It was like purple, electrified purple, as if air, but I could see the molecules, the energy of the molecules of the air, and it was all purple, and it undulated, and it just kept undulating until it completely engulfed me.
Wow. Okay, so you're saying you had waves of like communication from them before the portal even opened.
Yes, but they were in the form of like an epiphany, like a wonderful realization about something.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't, so communication on the other side of the portal is completely different. It's emphatic, it's fully, there's no explanation needed, there's no wondering about what something is. So, so once I was in this dimension, I could see this purple dimension at the same time as I could see Martha on the couch.
So you didn't lose your grasp on reality, or you didn't disappear off the couch. Martha was sitting right next to you, and then this dimension opened and like engulfed you.
Right, so I'm seeing with two sets of eyes. I'm seeing everything with my 5 physical senses, and then I'm experiencing the spiritual realm with my spiritual senses, whatever those really are. I don't exactly know for sure details.
Yeah.
But so both were happening at the same time, and I began to talk to Martha, tell her what was happening. And I'm going to take a pause here for a moment, and I'm going to
Okay. Sure, go ahead.
So I'm conversing with Martha, and then all of a sudden in the distance I see an image, and it's on my website. I rendered a graphic as best as I could of, I saw an image of a human figure, human form, a body suspended in the middle of a white oval array of twinkling lights. So every color of the rainbow was twinkling, but the predominant color was white. And it was like fishing line, monofilament stretching out, like all these fibers stretching out, forming this oval. And if I took my hands and outstretched them, I could never extend past the oval. Same with my feet. And so, and it wasn't just flat, it was round. It was like an egg. It was like human being being in the middle of a translucent egg.
And this is just appearing? Like
Yeah, it
nowhere?
appeared in front of me inside the purple, so the background behind this image was purple. But the thing is, you have to understand there's one aspect of the visual, but then there's the other aspect of all these other senses that exist in that realm. So I knew this being. I knew all about this being. I sensed the vibration of his life form. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like I experienced this being. I didn't just see him. I experienced the being. And so then that just stayed there. And then so this comes on to me in waves. And during the wave, I'm not able to really talk to Martha because I'm experiencing so much. But then the wave would subside, and even though the image would remain there, then I was talking to her about it and describing it to her. And then another wave came onto me, and then I became that being. So I became that being, and I saw myself as that being.
Oh,
And
I see.
that was another wave. And then right after that, so if I'm sitting on the couch with Martha like this, she's to my right, and I'm sitting talking to her, and then another wave came, and all of a sudden above her head there were 12 spiritual beings, and you can get a picture from the website, that appeared. And they appeared to float within this purplish dimension, but it was right above her head. And so it was to the east. So she was to the east. They hovered above her head to the east. And so I'm looking at them and I'm describing them to Martha. And then all of a sudden the first one starts communicating to me and starts communicating to me in these waves of elation. Oh, the thing is, I saw these beings. They were cloaked in robes.
What did the robes look like?
It's like a monk robe with a hood, and it covered the fingertips and all the way down to below the feet.
Like complete mystery. Like they're
Right.
there, they're making their presence known in a pretty strong way, except they're remaining in mystery.
Yeah, so I gathered that for whatever reason, which I didn't care about, they didn't want me to see their true form for whatever reason. And
Okay, so they're wearing like a white robe.
it's not even white. It's more like a gray.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more like a gray robe. And there were 12 of them, and there was depth to them. They went in rows of 3, sections of 3. So as it went back, each section got smaller, and it created a perspective. Like Knowles was in front, but all the other ones were lined up behind him, off to an angle.
In rows of 3. Like
Yeah, 3, and then 3, and then 3, and then 3.
But like one standing behind the next one.
Right. So not. Yeah. So just imagine this. um, 12 beings all standing behind each other at an angle. So I could see each one of them, but then all of a sudden the first one began to communicate with me, and he was like in the limelight. So he was lit up, not like a flashlight, but lit up. And then the other ones were in his shadow. And the farther away from him, the darker they got. They looked like they were more shadowy. And so he began to communicate with me. And so this is when he began to, I don't know how to explain this.
These weren't words. These were waves of energy coming from him in a communication, maybe telepathy, like telepathy, or wave of energy.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it telepathy, but I just think, well, I've come to know that that's how communication happens in that realm now. I mean, I understand that now. At that time, this was my first experience with this, so I didn't really know, but I didn't have any of those thoughts. I was just so enamored. The love he emanated was the same love from the divine that I felt years ago. He emanated the same love. And so that's what I was, if I was enamored with anything, that's what I was enamored with, was the energy of love that was pulsating through me from him. But he began to explain the human spirit. I won't go into great detail. It's in my book, and it's aspects of it are on the website. So he began to explain the human spirit, and that that it was the merging of divine spirit plus the human. I don't want to say the consciousness, although the human consciousness is involved. It's almost like the personality of the human, the thing that makes you who you are, and that makes you emphatically different than all other human beings on the face of this earth. Even though you have the same body, the same features, everything else, you have this unique personality. You can even have same character traits, but there's something inside us, I call this our authentic self, that makes that this is truly us. That's the entity that merges out of human consciousness into divine spirit to create the soul. That's what he was showing me. The light is divine spirit, and the human figure is human personality. It's the thing that will survive death. So your tears, your emotional pain will not survive death, because that's a construct of the human realm, of the physical realm. So he began to explain that to me, and he began to explain how these souls interact with each other on the spiritual realm to bring people together in order to facilitate spiritual growth. But most humans don't think of it that way. It's like the human is poked with a carrot, which is a human desire and attraction, and the human thinks that it's going to get something out of that, being attracted to that person in some form. It doesn't have to be romantic or sexual. It could be academic, but there's some form of attraction. That's the magnetism that the spirits use, the souls use, to bring two people together in order to facilitate the human evolution, in order to facilitate the human growth. When the consciousness is aware of all that, then the growth is exponentiated. It happens in a very quick pace, but when there's no consciousness about that, the humans spend more time dealing with the human drama.
You get stuck in the human drama.
Right. But which is great because otherwise we wouldn't have Netflix and couldn't have binge worthy shows.
Mm.
So anyway, so then another a profound wave came upon me, and I was lifted up out of my body on the couch, like a near-death experience, brought to the edge of a chasm, and I stood at the edge of this chasm looking out, and at first it was just nothing. So it was not purple. So the purple energy existed beyond the chasm. It didn't exist inside the chasm, which I don't really know what to think about that, but that's just what my experience was.
They didn't exactly explain that.
Yeah, like if I had asked, they'd probably say, and that's what you've taken away from this? You want to know what's inside the chasm?
Like, yeah,
yeah.
Forget about the chasm.
Yeah,
Don't pay attention to it.
Yeah. So then I remember I looked down to my left, down, and I could see myself on the couch with Martha, and I felt and saw this umbilical cord of energy attached to my body.
So this is like what near-death experience people talk about, like being lifted above their body and they can now see their body on the operating table.
Right. Yep. So I looked, and then all of a sudden my attention is drawn back to the chasm, probably Noel saying, don't worry about that. That's not. So I'm standing at the edge of the chasm, and all of a sudden, from the other side of the chasm, I felt in my chest this energetic pull and a pop. That cord was severed to my body, and I went across the chasm, and as I'm going across the chasm, these light beings appeared that looked the same oval array of light with a human form in it. They appeared.
So you were sucked across this dark chasm.
Right.
That was immense.
Yeah, so conveyed to me, or an understanding that doesn't translate into language, is that the chasm of death from human consciousness to spirit consciousness.
Like this realm and that realm.
Right. Meaning, yeah. So there's a chasm that exists between the two realms. So, but I crossed over it, and I'm traveling through this realm, and as I'm looking, I see all these different light beings and souls, and I know them.
They were people.
Yeah,
it's not ghosts. It's not angels.
No. By the way, Noel's energetic form was different than the human form. So Noel's was not like a human ascended master or something like that.
Okay.
Noel's was something else, and I don't really know. So, but years later, I began to realize, I wonder, because there was a limited amount of these people.
Oh, so it
wasn't like millions and millions.
Okay.
There was, I don't know, maybe a dozen or two at the most. And then years later, I started thinking, I wonder if that is like soul group, if the concept of a soul group.
Right, because if you went through the death process and you're being sucked across that chasm, what might be considered like heaven, there would be an infinite amount of souls there.
Right. So
why so few?
Yeah. So I don't really know for sure, but my conjecture is that those were people that I knew on a soul level, and they had already passed, and they were there to greet me. So, and I've heard that in other near-death experiences. but I didn't see them in human form. I saw them in spirit form.
Just spirit form.
Well, with the human outline of a body, like
Okay.
right, like the human form of a body without detail, like a template for a human body.
See through. You can
Yes,
see through
and it was all translucent.
all translucent.
Right. So, so then Knowles was guiding me, and I knew them, and they were so excited for where Knowles was taking me. It's like they knew where I was going next, and they were just so excited. Not like a human is excited, but that elation of first time of consciously experiencing something. And so anyway, so Knowles led me past there, and then it turned dark, and then my consciousness returned back to the couch, and the physical realm came into.
Oh, so
So this is the first time I lost touch with the physical realm. I had no thought or concept of the physical realm existence until I started coming back to.
so you lost memory of where they were
No,
taking you next?
no. So they hadn't taken me there yet.
Okay.
That's coming up.
Okay.
So yeah, so I retained all the memory very vividly. Even now I remember like it was yesterday. So another 15 minutes I'm explaining to Martha, and we're talking about her mom who had recently passed away, and I went with her 2 weeks before Knowles showed up. I went with her to see Daniel Brinkley talk. He wrote a book about his near-death experience. And I asked him the question that I was asking the night that Knowles showed up. I asked him, I raised my hand and stood up, and I said, so knowing what you know, how can you reach inside somebody and turn on the light switch? And he just looked at me, and he said, like, so I've never heard a question with such depth. And he said, you can't. I don't see any way you can, because we're all autonomous beings on a spirit level. We're
Right.
And there's no intrusion. So there's no reaching in and turning on the light switch for any human being. You can.
Because that would be intruding on their being.
So he said the best you can do is love people with that unconditional love.
That you experience in that dimension.
Right. And so anyway, so I was disappointed with the answer because I didn't get what I wanted. I didn't get my answer. So I asked it again the night that Noel showed up, but then I got the answer. That doesn't mean I didn't keep trying after that. But anyways, at this point, I've kind of stopped trying. So another 15, 20 minutes passes. And another wave comes upon me. So this time, if you remember that THX sound in movies when it first came out.
Yeah.
So this is what this felt like.
Right.
So it went from high to low, but mine was going from low to high. So it's like all of a sudden something was tuning my vibration, and the vibration, not the sound, there's no physical sound, but my body and my consciousness felt like it was being tuned up to the point where I left my body again, but instead of it being like before, it's like I began dissolving into another dimension. So another realm beyond the purple realm.
Okay, but this is an out of body. You're still physically on the couch.
I'm still physically on the couch. I physically never left the couch.
Okay.
Um, and so, but I'm taken up, and it's turning white and whiter. And just when I think it can't get any whiter, it keeps getting whiter.
Light.
Light, not like
The color
whiter
light, but
and whiter and more light and more light. It was like an infinity of increasing light, and my vibration kept going up and up and up, and I was taken somewhere. I don't think, and this is where I don't relate this to a lot of near-death experiences that have visualization and they have memory of that visualization.
yeah.
So I was taken somewhere, and at some point I lost human or soul consciousness, or the ability to retain that high level of vibration even in an elevated state, because this was elevated beyond my elevated state.
Okay. Try and keep your hands out of your
Oh, okay.
of blocking the face.
Okay. All right. So
So you're it sounds like you've taken up into an incredible place.
yeah, and it was just filled with complete fulfillment of love and energy and existence and eternity, and then it was brought back down, and as I'm coming back down out of the light turned less white, and then I became conscious that I had just gone somewhere, but I can't retain where it was. But I wasn't even back in my body yet. So it's almost like my soul, like in the purple realm, couldn't retain where I went because it was higher above that. So then all the way down into my human body, and then the physical realm slowly came into view. And there was Martha looking at me, and
Wow.
but at this point I couldn't describe anything, and I said I don't know what to say. I don't have any more words. I can't talk anymore. So she said, don't worry about talking. Just so we sat there for like another 15 minutes, just not talking, and I was still extremely elevated. I was elevated beyond my ability to communicate with my own human mind.
Did you physically feel different than before the experience? Like
I think
at that point coming back down, that must be an immense difference for the spirit to experience. I mean, it makes me think that this realm is so dense.
yeah, it is. The vibration of it is dense. That's not a negative thing. It's just simply the realm that we exist in as human consciousness is so densified. So all that has to happen is it has the consciousness just is retuned.
You know, what's funny, you said they basically told you you don't have the power to flick the switch
Right.
in a person, but yet they're doing these things to you.
Don't get me started. I'm like, yeah, so if you have the power, that means it's possible, right? You know,
Maybe whatever level they're at, but
They're-
not at the level you're at.
right. So that's the thing, is the soul has the ability to spiritualize my human mind. My human mind does not have the ability to spiritualize itself.
Yeah, okay.
Because
This
yeah.
is something that I think the New Age people really struggle with. That we want to spiritualize the mind by pinning modalities to ourselves. Like, this makes me spiritual, this makes me spiritual. All these different modalities and physical objects of worship, pinning them to us, none of them actually make us spiritual. That the spirit, first of all, is already spiritual, but the mind isn't. It needs to be infused by the spirit, and then that's the spiritualism there. But the mind on its own, as an organ, the consciousness that comes from it, is not inherently spiritual at all. But we try to, and the personality isn't spiritual. It's just, it's in the mind, and and I think we struggle with that.
Yeah, so I see now that mankind is an evolving species, and it's irrelevant where you want to set the beginning date of man's consciousness, whether it was 1,000,000 years ago or whether it was 6,800 years ago, in the Garden of Eden from biblical story. That's irrelevant. The relevant part is that man is an evolving species. He's evolving physically, mentally, emotionally, and he's evolving spiritually. So all of this is designed, so creation itself is designed in an evolutionary state of being to where everything is evolving back to the original creator, back to the source. So man is evolving back to the source. So in the beginning, so as man evolves, whatever he does that is along that evolutionary path is good and positive and supports the evolutionary path spiritually.
And probably takes a long time. Nothing happens overnight.
Thousands of years as man evolves as a civilization. So individuals evolve at different paces, but very few of them outrun the current mode of the planet. So the planet's evolution, we are bound to planetary evolution, no matter how evolved I might think I am, or anybody, the greatest teachers on the face of this earth are still bound to not being able to exceed a certain level of spiritual evolution because we are bound as a collective to this planet. This planetary reality and existence has an energetic vibration. We can lag behind at the very back of that evolutionary process, or we can be at the very forefront of that evolutionary process. The problem that most of us have when we get on the forefront, we look back and we see how uninvolved, from our perspective, how unevolved the people behind us are, but that is a mistake. That is a misnomer. It is
and it really doesn't do any good.
Yeah, but it's just not it's not a complete understanding. So you'll notice that everybody who actually had a genuine spiritual experience it considers all men equal, considers that each man is a sovereign, evolving being in and of themselves. And so that is one thing that comes from the enlightenment of seeing beyond yourself, seeing into the spiritual realm. In any form that happens, you look back at man differently now. You look back at yourself differently. And so, anyway, so I'm not sure what got us off on that, but so the second to the last wave of the evening is I was tuned back up again, and I went even higher. So all I know is I went higher than I was 15 minutes before. And as I came back down, the same thing happened. I completely lost the ability to hold the knowledge of where I was. Not because it was blocked from me or anything like that. It's because the complete inability in the lower, denser light realm, even at the soul level, cannot grasp that light, that frequency. It can't. So best way to put it is like, a dog whistle. The dog hears it, but the human can't. So to the human, it looks like a human is just blowing in the whistle and nothing's happening, but the dog is freaking out. So that's like it was. So as I came back into the human realm, so then everything settled, and probably about an hour went by, and we began to move about and do different things. By the way, I forgot to mention, after Knowles and the 12 beings showed up, Martha got up to get a glass of water, and I watched her, and it was the first time I took my eyes off of Knowles or Martha from the east. And as I watched her go, they stayed in the east.
So they were fixed.
They were fixed in this spiritual realm in this one place, and it was to my physical east. So I got up and I started twirling around, and no matter where I twirled, they stayed in the same place. As I watched the whole room twirl, and I'm laughing and joking, and she asked me, who is this that's speaking to you? And I looked over and got this huge wave, and it was just one thing. It was this huge wave. It's not in words, but I am knowledge. So I looked back at Martha and I said, he is knowledge. And I'm twirling around, laughing, and I say, I think I'm going to nickname him Knowles. So that's where the name Knowles came from. He didn't introduce himself as Knowles. He introduced himself as knowledge.
So they didn't tell you who they were, where they're from?
No.
It remained as a mystery.
Right. They remain a mystery to me even today. But I've studied a lot of things, and I've tried to pin certain things on them. They're either that, maybe they're this, maybe they're that. But soon I came to realize it's all conjecture on my part, and I have no idea what's going on in that on that level. So an hour went by. We're sitting on the couch. It's like 5 a.m. now, or 4 a.m., something like that. It's really late. Martha's getting tired. She has to work the next day. I didn't. She got up to go to the bathroom, and I'm sitting there by myself, and I'm thinking how wonderful this is going to be, that they're just going to remain with me forever now. They're going to be there forever. They're going to go to work with me. They're going to be there when I'm playing with my kids. They're going to be there in my life to guide me and to hold this energy of their love. Right. And then the last wave came upon me, and it ripped through my heart. It was very emotionally painful, and it kind of went like this. They, through knowledge, they showed me, they conveyed to me that I am both the liar and the one being lied to. That I am spirit in physical form, but the lie is that I'm physical form that has a spirit. From this lie that was created by the human veil, it's not that I did something bad or wrong. The human veil creates this holographic system encircling the human being, and it's like this translucent stained glass window circling all around your consciousness. And as you look out and you perceive what you hit a stained glass window and the hologram, and it reflects back to you your own thoughts. And then you begin to believe your own thoughts and your own perceptions. And then you look over here and it's the same. And so we're walled in as human beings to believe. Basically, we're believing all our own stories. We're the ones lying to ourselves, not lying as in horrible person lie, but as in false perception. And then as a human being, we're so prone to solidify those beliefs so that we can move on in our life and everything's not a mystery.
Right.
So as we begin to grow spiritually, as willing participants, the soul comes in and lightens up one of those panes of glass so that we see through better. And that's all that's happening. Spiritual enlightenment is just seeing past the veil with more insight, more perception. And then it happens over here and over here. And little by little, we began to grasp that there is something beyond our own consciousness. Beyond the human consciousness, there is a realm where beings exist and stuff happens. They may even have coffee with another. So I cried. It was like I'd been found out. My whole life I'd been living a lie, and I'd been found out, and I'm the liar. And it's like, what am I going to do? There's no solution to this problem. And I cried, and so
Did they tell you there was a solution to that, or were we just stuck?
So for this moment in time, which seemed to last forever, I'm stuck with this excruciating emotional pain with no way out. And I'm having a hard time remembering it right now in this session, but there was something, I can't remember what it was at this moment, but then eventually Noel said to me, and these were like words, I mean, conveyed to me in knowledge, but they were more like words rather than understanding. And it goes like this. He said, when you understand all that we have shown you, you will be who you truly are. This is your task, and when accomplished, each in their own time will come to you, and this is to prepare you for what is to come. And then the whole dimension just closed. The portal just went shoo. And they were gone. The spiritual dimension was gone, and I was left with pain. No, I don't have an attitude toward him. But so I ran out on the dock, looking up at the sky, at all the stars, and I'm crying out because when they left, that incredible love that I was experiencing left with them. And um, I just fell to my knees and I cried. And um, I guess Martha came out of the bathroom. She looked around the house and then she heard me out back. She opened the sliding door and I'm out there crying and she's like concerned about the neighbors, which I understand. But I knew it was over. I knew they weren't coming back, and I thought they were going to stay with me forever. And so I went back inside. I told her everything, and I didn't know this was possible, but to be so distraught and yet so filled with elated love at the same time, I didn't think that was possible because my experience of pain, emotional pain, was the lack of love. And now I'm experiencing pain filled with love. Even though their presence, even though it wasn't there like it was with their presence, it still resided in me like very, very powerfully. So we went to sleep. The next day I woke up. She went to work. I went down to the beach off Las Olas, parked my car, and went out there and sat on the beach. And I'm completely caught up in my head, and I sat and I began to relax and mellow out. And I looked over, and all of a sudden I saw this guy's spirit. So this overweight man from New Jersey who had recently retired, moved down here, but he just got divorced. He's standing there, and it's like I knew his whole life story. I saw his spirit, and then I started looking around, and I see the spirits of everybody. So everybody's walking around with this glow of light, which wasn't as pronounced as my when I saw him in the purple realm, but it was like this faint glow. But what happened, it opened up some portal to where the transparency between two soul beings is complete. So mine was, I wouldn't say complete, but I all of a sudden would know a lot about people. But what began to emerge was their pain, their emotional pain, covered up and swept aside and discounted, but sitting there seething as thorns, walking around like thorns in their psyche. And 2 weeks, every day I walked around and I would pass people and I would experience their pain, and I had no way to alleviate it. And every day I'd come home and I would jump in the shower. This is when we lived at the tennis club. I would jump in the shower and I would sit there on my knee. I would fall to my knees in pain for other people and my own pain, my own emotional pain as a human. And the water would just be hot, and I would sit there and cry until the water started turning cold, and I would get out, and then I would go fall asleep. And after 2 weeks of that, I asked that it be removed, that I couldn't put up with it anymore. It was so overwhelming. And I had no answer. I had no answer for anybody.
The internal pain of others.
Yeah, and I wanted to stop seeing their pain. I wanted to stop, because I didn't just see it like, oh, I see you got some emotional pain there. Right. It's like I could feel their pain. And so one night I went to bed early and you guys weren't there, and I asked that it be removed. I cried, please remove this. I can't take it anymore. I woke up the next morning, it was gone. So I began to be able to function a little better now. And that's when I began going to bookstores and trying to seek out people with other experiences. But I never really found anybody with something this profound.
The closest thing would probably people that have had near-death experiences.
Right. So I started talking. I started talking to them, but I found people didn't believe that stuff like that could happen unless you died.
Right.
So that's why I started calling it near-death-like experience. It's like that experience, but without the death.
You didn't have to die.
I didn't have to die. And so I slowly stopped talking to people about it. Then eventually I just stopped talking to Martha about it because it was too much, you know. It's like, yeah. It reminded me of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know, the guy that was obsessed and built this mud pile mountain in his room.
Right.
So I learned how to move it toward the back, but every day I woke up and I kept thinking, and this is your preparation for what is to come, or each of the others will come in their own time. So every day for the next 2.5 years, I woke up thinking, hoping that this was the day that they would return.
Well, he did say, he didn't say a lot, but that was something he did say. It conveyed to you that the others would
right.
return.
Yeah, and it still hasn't happened. And that was 1994, and this is the year 2022.
That you know of.
Well, they didn't show up in that same form. I've thought about some of my other experiences. Maybe that was the next one appearing to me in their own time and in their own way.
Right.
But I don't know that for sure, and it was never conveyed to me.
But it's interesting that they said, they didn't just say, hey, here's this knowledge of the construct of how we really are. They also said to prepare you for what is to come. And
right.
that begs the question, what are they talking about?
Right.
What?
And they could just be talking about physical death.
They could just be talking about death.
Yeah. So I've stopped a long time ago conjecturing about when and where and how and if and
right.
all those aspects of that. But that experience profoundly changed me. And one thing it did, when I had that experience, I was coming to the tail end of my involvement. I had already been away from it for 3 years, my involvement in fundamentalist Christianity, because my involvement in 4 different churches, I helped start 2 churches, helped run or lead house churches, different group Bible studies. I loved the Bible, but I read it like different than other people did. I read it for the spiritual value of it as opposed to the doctrinal value of it. And so I always saw the lack of, and none of them ever thought this, but the lack of true spirit guidance with running a church, organizing a church. It seemed like the church I was involved in was more like an Amway, because very evangelistic,
yeah, right.
very progressive, very dynamic, wonderful people. I really loved the people when it didn't involve any part of the leadership. So each time I asked to be removed from leadership, and then eventually I would be considered divisive and not submissive to their authority, and so I was never asked to leave, like directly say you should leave, but I was ostracized. And so I was removed from positions of leadership because I contended with the fact that we're keeping incredible stats on people. Like if they prayed that day, how many people they talked to about Jesus, you know, if they read their Bible, if they did this, if they had this whole checklist.
It's in the form of commercialism. They've commercialized it, like you said, Amway, like stats and just the modalities and
Yeah, so the authoritarianism was what came out. And so I confronted always, but in private, the elders and the leadership. I would always set up a meeting in private. Mom was involved in one of those meetings. Soon after that, I was stripped of all my title in the church. Like 2 days after that meeting, I was stripped of we call them discipling partners, older man who was discipling me was an elder. Everything was taken away, and I was just left to like flop around in the church. I was never asked to leave, but who could stay after that? So that happened to me 4 times.
So you confronted the leaders, and what would you say?
It's too lengthy, I think, that when I want to go into at this moment,
Yeah,
and off the topic of the Knowles, but
right.
just suffice it to say that I saw one thing in the Bible spiritually and my spiritual experiences, and then I saw another thing taking place in the leadership of the churches that I was a part of. So the members were clueless. Really, they didn't care to know or want to know. They were just pretty much there. They just were showing up. They were very involved. It was a very dynamic church, but they were clueless of what the thought processes were behind the scenes. But
Oh yeah, like you mean what the leaders were doing?
Nobody hardly ever knew we were taking stats.
Mm.
But every week I had to hand in stats on the 75 people in my house church.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah. And so anyway, so in 1994 I was coming out of that paradigm and that mentality and still thinking about the concept, and I thought about the concept that Satan masquerades as an angel of light, and maybe this was Satan appearing to me. Those thoughts would, come into me. But one of the things that Knowles broke inside me was the humanistic shackles that held on to belief systems as opposed to experience.
Right.
And so I left belief systems pretty much behind after that, and began to think, well, all I know is what I've experienced. And what I've experienced with Knowles was wonderful, and what I've experienced through the times of my life with God were wonderful. And so
if it is the devil masquerading as an angel of light, he's doing incredibly positive things.
He's never led me astray to go kill somebody or do stupid crap like that.
Okay, well, that's great.
That's a plus.
I just don't think that that's what's taking place. I think that your consciousness is moving out of belief and dogma, which is others oppose on you religiously.
It left.
And then the modalities, the character,
right.
Changing the character to suit others.
All that left me within the first 2 years after Knowles. It all just dissipated in me as vaporware, and
right.
Yeah, but then that's when I began to see how much people rely on belief as truth.
Because they don't experience.
Right. And so I understand that. So, given for lack of experience,
How else could it be?
how else could it be? So, the mind sees what the mind sees. What is it? What the eye see, the mind believes.
Yeah.
So, if all we see is three-dimensional, what are we going to...
And people don't go around having these types of experiences like what you've had.
Not on this level, although I know there's a lot of people who, and I don't discount any form of human experience, good, bad, right, or wrong.
We honor that.
Right, as their human experience. But when it comes into spiritual experiences, what I've noticed, because I've experienced the same, and I don't count these as spiritual experiences, I count them as elevated human experiences that tend toward the spiritual, that are leaning toward the spiritual. But emotional and conceptual or imaginary, matter of fact, I'm imagining this. So I'm imagining the blue flame coming down, or I'm imagining a white aura around me. So you may be imagining something that is true or existing, but you're still imagining it. You're not actually experiencing
It's not actually happening.
the white aura around you. So what I'm saying is, when we leave the belief of the realm of belief and conjecture and imagination, human imagination, and we seek what the actual spirit holds for us, what the spiritual realm holds for us, we seek that enlightened experience, not as a meditative, I'm nothing, which is a blissful state that I've reached before, but I've never had a spiritual experience during that, like the dimension opening. But if I could live in that space the rest of my life, I would, because it's a wonderful space. So this is why I think that people see that as an incredible spiritual experience, but until it penetrates the veil, it's still a human experience.
Right.
And I know,
There's nothing wrong with that. It's where humanity is at. So we went from cavemen
right.
to Jesus shows up, and now we have religion.
And we're no longer crucifying people on the side of the
Yeah,
road, so that's a plus.
Yeah, and we used to do that.
Yeah.
So we're moving through these things.
Right, so you can see in America, at least, and that's all I can speak about as far as statistically, in America the stats are showing, not just because of COVID, but since the millennium, there has been a drop in church attendance. And the millennials are saying that two things. One, the minute they walk in there, they feel judged. Yeah. And the second thing is, they don't actually have an experience. They go there and listen to people talking and everything, but they're not having an experience. And so the millennials are looking for something that will give them an experience. So I think, and this is just my personal opinion, based on what Noel showed me, and basically the trajectory of man's consciousness towards the soul, through the soul, to the divine, is not a religious trek, it's an experiential trek. But I think that this is where man is evolving to. And he's at the precipice now of wanting to do away with the modalities and the things that aren't giving him experiences, and start embracing things that are giving him experiences. And meditation is giving somebody an inner experience that they weren't getting elsewhere. And so I think it is part of the evolutionary step towards that. I just think that in 1978, I was given a shortcut from being a regular human, normal human being with my normal human thought processes like everybody else, to having an experience with the divine, and then experiencing what it's like to have all my thoughts originate from divine love. And nothing else can get into my head. But I'm not been able to hold that. You know, it's 3, 6, 9 months at the longest. And so I think that the idea of religion and church are slowly fading in America, and the onset of personal experience with spirituality is increasing. And when man understands that spirituality is non-physical, non-human, as opposed to like a state of mind or a state of being. I mean, it can be in a certain conversation, but spirituality, it means of spirit.
Right.
Human is of human, but our soul is a combination of both. So we can have an experience while in the human form of spirit, but that's different than trying to spiritualize a human mind that never sees beyond the veil